more interestingly, both in this poem and in Gulshan-e-Raz-e-Jadid, the poet makes clear when he urges the reader to make your soul, the Jan, your journey. So the poet makes it clear that the internal selves of individual Muslims is a project in journeying. I mean, that's the challenge to the reader. He says to the reader, make your soul your journey. So the project of reconstructing Islam is to focus, is the challenge to each individual Muslim to make their soul the subject of their journeys. So why is this important then? And I think there are a number of reasons that this is important, particularly in the Javed Nama, which is that you have a kind of spaciousness of the cosmos through which the poet travels, because he travels through all the planets in the cosmos. You have the spaciousness of the cosmos tied together with an expansive inner self. And the two have to go hand in hand. The expansion of an inner self through travel tied together with a spacious cosmos. And the reason that's important is because internal spaciousness within an individual Muslim consciousness counters and challenges the fixing of consciousness by European Orientalist views, which imagine that the term Muslim is a demobilizing term. So the term Muslim in European colonialism, if you like, has a limiting, homogenizing, and incarcerating effect, because it assumes that the consciousness of the individual Muslim is always fixed and frozen. So in that sense, this reconstruction of Islam through a traveling identity challenges that freezing of Muslim consciousness by European, if you like, Orientalist colonialism. And the other reason that it's important is that it also challenges Sufi notions of travel, and I discuss this in detail in my book, for which bekhudi, or selflessness, the loss of self, is the key. So what Iqbal does is to invert Sufi notions of travel, to argue that what's important is khudi rather than bekhudi. So, and again, there are lots of details here, because Iqbal also takes certain things from Sufi travel literature, even as he inverts it. And that's how, and I talk about that complicated legacy of Sufism. It's not just a rejection of Sufism, it's a selective appropriation of certain elements of Sufism. For example, I show how he uses the notion of zawq in his, or vision, in his travelogues. And the third thing that's important about Iqbal's notion of travel is, and this is what I try to do in my book. Sorry, I have to sell the book to you, because more and more education is becoming about business in the UK. But anyway, the third reason it's important is because I think you have to read Iqbal's version of travel against 19th century travelogues written by Indians, both Muslim and non-Muslim, in English, Urdu, and Persian. And I actually try to do that in my book and show you can only see how distinctive and original Iqbal's notion of travel is if you look against travelogues written by Indians in English, Urdu, and Persian in the 19th century. And that, if you historically contextualize Iqbal, it brings out the originality of his notion of travel. So that's kind of the first point about travel literature and the inauguration of of Muslim identity as a traveling identity. The second part of reorientation, what I began the talk by talking with, the second part of reorientation, is also the attempt in Iqbal to construct in his poetry and also in his prose works a new transnational geographical consciousness. So here reorientation, there's a kind of reorientation in terms of an alternative mapping of the globe in terms of the reconstruction of Islam. So if you like, they're kind of cartographical or map reading exercises in his poems. And basically, what I try to show in my book is that what he tries to do is to create an image of the world with an alternative center to Europe. So what he dramatizes is a re-centered Islamicized geography, an alternative center to image of the globe created by European colonialism. And again, travel is important here as well as maps, because scholars, for example, Mary Louise Pratt, has shown how important travel literature was in European, fashioning a European global consciousness. And also how important travel literature was in legitimizing European empire. So that's another reason Iqbal's notion of travel is important, because there is also this history of the role of travel literature in European colonialism itself. Others, for example, have shown how important travel literature was and exploration narratives in works of literature, particularly novels in European literature between 1880 and 1920, and how important that was in formulating a geopolitical imagination of European empire. Okay, so that's another context we have to be aware of, why travel is so important for Iqbal, because travel is important in European colonialism, in legitimizing European colonialism. But what Iqbal does, therefore, in travel is to recenter a global geography on the Hijaz. So in what Iqbal does is to redraw the map of the globe by recentering on the Hijaz as a sacred space in Arabia. But the way he does it is important. For example, in his Urdu poem Kanare Ravi, the banks of the river Ravi, what he does is to create links between diverse continents by focusing on the Hijaz. So he creates, if you like, transcontinental links by focusing on the Hijaz. So the Hijaz becomes a center which makes possible transcontinental links. So, for example, he connects the sound produced by the flowing of the river Ravi in the Punjab with the sacred space of the Kaaba in Arabia. And similarly, in his poem Sicilia, Sicily, he connects the ruins of the mosque in Sicily with the Hijaz in the first couplet and with India in the final couplet. So there's this kind of reenactment of transcontinental maps, if you like, Islamicized transcontinental maps, by recentering the globe on the Hijaz itself. And similarly in the Urdu poem Masjid-e Cordoba, he talks about, he imagines the mosque at Cordoba, the ruins of the mosque at Cordoba, as serving as a locus for imagining a global community of Muslims. So what's important here is not just that the Hijaz becomes a center for transcontinental connections, but also that the ruins of mosques, ruination, the ruined monuments of Islam become key to imagining a reconstructed Islam. So there's a close connection between ruination and reconstruction in his poetry. So here then, reorientation means recentering, creating an alternative map to counteract the geography produced by European colonialism. So it's an alternative map to counteract the geography used by European colonialism. So that's really the first part of my talk on orientation in Iqbal and what orientation means. And I wanted to keep it quite broad because I wanted to, I don't want to just repeat what I said in my book. Although that would be easier, I have to say, but anyway, especially on a Saturday morning when the sun's shining outside.